what sort of has been like the joy of this for you?
Right. Well, you know what it is. It's students and relationships. That's how I live my life. I've always been obviously background in student affairs, background in community colleges, all student-centered kinds of things. That I enjoy helping people move to what I call their next level.
Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Now. I'm your host, Susana Muñoz. Today is a special treat as I get to interview my dissertation advisor, mentor friend, Dr. Larry Ebbers. We'll learn about his career, his wisdom, and his insights into the field of higher education and his work with community colleges. I'm so excited that you agreed to do this, Larry. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and learning community for thousands of us who work alongside and adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We hope you'll find these conversations make a contribution to the field and are restorative to the profession. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays, so find us at studentaffairsnow.com or on Twitter. This episode is brought to you by Stylus. Visit styluspub.com or use the promo code SANOW for 30% off free shipping. This episode is also sponsored by LeaderShape. Go to leadershape.org to learn how they can work with you to create a just, caring, and thriving world. So as I mentioned, I'm your host, Susana Muñoz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, ella. I'm an associate professor of higher education leadership at Colorado State University. I am hosting this conversation today from Fort Collins, Colorado, which is the ancestral homeland of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne's people. So let's get into our conversation. Dr. Ebbers, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Susana. It's really good to reconnect with you after several years here, although we've always been in contact. So
yes,
it's a pleasure for me to be with you.
Yes, I was trying to figure out, like, when did I first meet Larry Ebbers? And I want to say it was when I was trying to maybe getting hired as what we used to call them minority liaison officers at Iowa State University for the College of Education. And I think either you were part of my search process or you were an associate dean at that time. I can't remember.
Well, it was a combination of things. One is I knew that you were an graduate of Iowa State, but I did not know you as an undergraduate. But I knew you, but became known to you as we were recruiting minority liaison officer, but also at the same time, Mark Harding in admissions was trying to recruit you to come to the admissions office. And we were good friends and we had worked together on a number of projects. And he said, do you know Susana Muñoz? And I said, well, I do know her from the Colorado State program. And he said, well, she's getting her master's and she's interested in looking and coming back to Iowa State because her family is in Iowa. And I said, okay, so we made a deal that we would recruit you and we would both recruit you and then you could decide which position you wanted. And of course, obviously, we had agreed that whoever hired her paid all of the expenses with regard to this. So he came in, interviewed with both of us at the same time. And I obviously used the pitch to get you into the College of Education and to become a part of our program. And so that sort of the rest of that is history. As we know, you were very effective and then we got you into the doctoral program and really from there you've really blossomed, and so it's been a great experience and a great relationship over the years.
Oh, I agree. I would say so. I did not know about the back door kind of deals that you were making, but that's awesome to know that from all these years. But I do know that when I was a doctoral student, one of the things that I really appreciate learning about, and because this is something that we didn't really learn about in my master's program, was just about the community colleges and the community college mission. And so I would love to kind of talk a little bit more about that. But first, sure. I also, know that you have been in higher education for well over 40 years.
About 55.
55, oh my gosh. Okay.
Now that I'm retired, I retired after 50 years in higher ed.
50 years.
But I still continue to work with community colleges and also other institutions of higher ed as well. So.
Oh my goodness, awesome. So how have you seen higher education shift over time? I'm sure over 50 years, you've seen lots of changes and shifts, but in what ways have have you shifted over time? In what ways have you seen higher education shift over time?
Sure. I think we've all had to shift over time. I think it's and one of the exciting things about higher education is the challenges that come to us and the opportunities for us to make change and to work. I think that probably several things that I've seen over time. One would be a more inclusive, more diverse student bodies, I think, which has always been a mantra of mine, and that we are inclusive institutions and that we've seen major movements in that arena. And so I'm really happy from that respect. I am, as you know, we have lots of students in higher ed. Our conversations say that we need to work on the pipeline for administrators who are representative of these groups. And I think that's pretty widely known. We've seen it in terms of teaching, we've seen it in terms of representation at the administrative level, and oftentimes student affairs is one area where we do see a lot more diversity than we do in faculty ranks and other leadership roles. I think there's a real concern I see now about the public trust. We're seeing something that is new to us.
Yeah.
I think that we, those of us who are first-gen students and moved through and watched all of this, even though the Census Bureau indicated we have the highest level of education, 30-some% post having a master's degree, there appears to be a lack of trust about higher education and what it's doing. And so I think that's something we really need to work on in terms of restoring that trust. I would say that we've been through some difficult times. The pandemic is a real example of that, and that we've responded in various ways to it. Institutions have done a lot of different things, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I think it's also a concern about the financial resources. We see more and more states and other institutions focusing on resources, and what it ultimately involves is raising tuition for students. And we've seen some movement there in terms of free community college, but that's probably not going to happen right now for a variety of reasons. But I think that states have had while higher education was in a leadership role in many states for a long time, there are so many other competing interests now with respect to resources, and everyone at the same time is trying to cut taxes, and so it's the resource allocation I think that's been a real surprise. On the other hand, we've all been through, I remember some years there were no increases for faculty, no increases in institutional resources from the legislature. And so it's resulted in rising tuition, but I think it's overall, it's a concerning trend to me. So.
Yeah, no, one of the things that you mentioned was about the public trust, and I wanted to see if we can focus on a little bit more because you're in Iowa. And I know there have been some efforts in the past to dismantle tenure, and I know this happens in other states too. But I also know it was interesting to see how some of the ag businesses kind of came in defense of higher education. So just kind of want to get your thoughts about.
Well, I agree. I mean, I have great trust in our president, Wendy Winterstein, who served as the Dean of Agriculture and Life Sciences for a number of years. I know her personally. I've known her for many years, but she really did go, I understand, to bat on the tenure issue, particularly how important it is to colleges and universities, particularly in the ag sciences, to have people who can come in and do the kind of work that they need to do. We're right in a phase now, about tenure, but it's always been a discussion point. It was even a discussion point at my doctoral whatever we called it at that point in time, qualifying, whatever it was. And my major professor from my undergraduate days said, "Well, Larry, what do you think about tenure?" I said, "I think you can do without tenure." I said, and that was back in 67 or 68, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've really come to appreciate tenure at this point. I could tell we have enough time. I could tell all kinds of stories about being a tenured professor and making change and all of that sort of thing. But so it's one of those things that's always been there. It has a little fuel right now, but I think as people realize the importance of tenure and the decisions that are being made, the Chronicle last week featured a series of professors who were denied tenure. And so it will always be a continuing debate within the academy. So
yeah, no, I would agree with that sentiment too. So in focusing a little bit about your own trajectory and your lived experiences, I know that just from what I know from you, you kind of came from like an ag education background. Is that correct?
Right.
So
That's right.
how do you go from ag education to community colleges? So what was, how did you get interested in that?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about, I came back actually to work I was teaching agriculture in Iowa high schools. And we were running all over the state, all over our part of the state to get a graduate class. Iowa State professors were coming out and teaching the classes. And so I had an opportunity. I worked in residence life as an undergrad, as an RA. We didn't call them HRs at the time. And so I had become good friends with Chuck Frederickson, who was a major leader in housing in this country, who recently passed, unfortunately, but lived to be 91. So it's but anyway, yeah. So I came back in residence life, and I had finished my master's, and a couple of people said, well, why don't you go on for a doctorate? And I said, well, do I need to go someplace else? And they said, no, we're starting a new higher ed program here. So why don't you, if you would just consider, and you could work full time and then still do your doctoral work. And so we did. And so started the higher ed program. It was led by, they just initiated a new program when the community colleges were created as a way to increase the educational level of community college leaders. And so they branded it as a higher ed program. And so I started taking classes, and many of the individuals in these classes were also community college people. And so that's how I got acquainted with a number of them. They, 3 or 4 of them became community college presidents, and I was still in residence life. But then as I finished, I had the opportunity to go to the College of Education to work for Dean Virgil Artemarcino. And he was a 22 founding dean and was a 22-year dean. And I was his assistant to the dean, and doing all kinds of projects and budget personnel, all facilities, all of that sort of stuff. And also at the same time, I had an academic appointment as an assistant professor. So he said, and he was director of junior colleges in the state of Iowa before he came to Iowa State to start the School of Education, College of Education. He said, so we got there, and so obviously the Regents institutions were providing oversight for the community colleges. They would go out, and they have a team who would go out every year and take a look at each of the community colleges to ensure that they were academically in the sort of, so to speak, so that the nature of the classes and the rigor was there. And so he said, he called me and said, I'm supposed to go on these visits. And he said, I'm not doing those. He said, I don't really have time. He said, you're going to do those. So in my first year in the College of Education, I went, and my first visit was to Indian Hills Community College in Ottumwa, Iowa. And so I went down there and did that. And it was, and so I continued to do those throughout the state. And anyway, so I was involved in some cases. They weren't as happy with this as others, but it was Department of Ed, Department of Ed was the oversight group along with a Regents representative. So I got to know the Department of Ed folks really well, and we were really a good team. I didn't go on all of them, but obviously selected ones that he had to do. So we were interested then in saying, okay, if you look around the leadership teams, there are really no women in leadership roles. I mean, it was all essentially white males. And that's part of the time. Many of them came out of the K-12 system. Some came from other places, but majority of them were there. And we had a woman by the name of Virginia Moscas Loftus, who came to DMAC, Des Moines Area Community College, as an executive dean, which was essentially the number 2 there. And she was also good friends with another colleague of mine, Jim Ratcliffe, who actually led. At that point, I was leading the Student Affairs Division program, and Jim was leading the Community College Division. And so he knew her, and so we had this meeting about how we could improve and bring women and minorities into leadership roles in community colleges. So we started this program called LINK. And the next year, Jim left, and the next year, Virginia left to go to other places. Jim went to Penn State for the Center for Study of Higher Ed, and Virginia went out to the East or West Coast. So anyway, so here we had the LINK program, and it was for women and minorities only, no men at all. And each of the campuses, I remember working through getting it approved, and obviously I knew enough of the presidents from my prior experiences and being out on the campuses that when we had we brought this proposal for a new program to the presidents. and they agreed. Of course, obviously we had it all set up before that. We knew it was going to pass, but then each of the colleges would send at least one person to this year-long leadership experience. So and I could tell you a bunch of stories about that, but the background was started, and so the program was started, is now in its 30th year, I think, 30, maybe 31 or 32, and it's stayed started the test of time. I was really involved in getting it started. We were going to attend presidents meetings all day, and then they decided the presidents were going into executive sessions all the time. So I said, this has got to change. And so we changed the format really into a leadership program rather than just being prepared to be a president. And we can say today that it's been amazing, and so we were very involved in that, and we made them sort of camp. We did most of them in Des Moines because that was where everybody came to at the time, and but now we moved that around a little bit. So then as we moved along through this, we had 13, 14 years of it. One of the had a graduate student by the name of Chuck McFarland, who came from DMAC. He had a disagreement with the president, and they decided to part ways, and he got an assistantship at Iowa State. And he said, you know, Larry, he said, and I knew him from previously, he did his work over in IED&T, we called it industrial IED technology, because he was an automotive guy. And so he came to me and he said, we talked about this. He said, we really need to expand the program and develop a program for men. I said, okay, so let's talk about this. And so we developed then a leadership program designed to prepare presidents. We called it CLIck at the time. They changed it now to the Iowa Leadership Institute, Iowa Community College Leadership Institute, designed for upper level administrators. Even though we had, particularly in the beginning, we had a number of women who were moving into those roles, and with the idea that they would become presidents. So that was the emphasis that we had, and it was a great. We made it totally campus based, and that's the other thing that I've been able to do, is that we were out on the campuses. We would obviously meet with the president for a little while, talking about leadership changes. We also had the opportunity to bring in some of the nation's best community college leaders in terms of academic people, John Roosh, several other people that I worked with him at the University of Texas, and also we worked a lot with SESI and trying to look from it. So I really wanted to bring in the role of the academic role as well as the community college role, and so it was a nice blend of things that we could do, and we took the program out of state as well. We had people from out of state come and join the program, but we also then took our community college faculty and staff, the students in the Link and CLIck programs, to Johnson County Community College Metro in Omaha, having them get an opportunity to look outside Iowa. One of the things we found, Catherine Boswell has always been a great supporter, and she asked the question once. She was here for a seminar, and she said, how many of you have worked outside Iowa? One. And so that's why we said, well, we need to really do this national presence, and that's what we did with the Community College Leadership Program. I think that we've also had two Iowa State presidents that were really beneficial in terms of our relationship with community colleges. Martin Jiske was the first one, but particularly Greg Joffrey. And they were also very interested in developing community college relations, and we put together an events partnership program so students could start at the community college and transfer directly to Iowa State seamlessly. And so we were doing a number of things out in the state. And so we were very, very visible. And that's, I think, that helped me the most, is the fact that I worked quite closely with community college leaders. But starting, and there's no question about the two leadership development programs. And at the same time, we had the combination of, you talked about earlier about community college leadership programs. So people who didn't have masters, we said, you need to get your master's, particularly in the Link program. This was early on. And so we put ways, we gave academic credit for those programs, as well as, obviously we had assignments and everything. And also we did some early online kinds of things. So we really tried to integrate that. And then we also then created the PhD program, which, again, I prepared a lot of administrators. So at one point in time, I think I did some data work. We had 21 presidents out of the group. We had somewhere around 50, 60 vice presidents, and over 110 deans and directors. So it's the leadership pipeline that makes a difference.
Right. Oh my goodness, that is amazing how you built these programs from the ground up, and it was really about those connections and relationships that you had forged, early on. And I understand also it's really important to have that leadership buy-in for these things to really be institutionalized. But so out of all of that work, what has been sort of like your favorite part? What sort of has been like the joy of this for you?
Right. Well, you know what it is. It's students and relationships. I mean, that's how I live my life. I've always been obviously background in student affairs, background in community colleges, all student-centered kinds of things. I enjoy helping people move to what I call their next level, things that they have. I remember a couple of people, one who was president today said, when I came to Link, I said, first of all, she was a faculty member. Why did they send me? And she said, and I've been with her every move she's made administratively. But then she got asked to be a dean over some of the department chair first. And so she said, what do you think? I said, oh, I think you can. Well, she said, I never thought about that. And I said, well, there are other opportunities. And so she then moved to a dean. And then the next question was she was also a business faculty member, and the CFO position came open, and the president called me and said, what do you think? I said, absolutely. So she went into that. Well, then the vice president of academic affairs retired. And so I said, so are you going to move to that one? Well, do you think I should? I said, yes. And so then I said, the next step for you, she worked on her PhD. She got her PhD. So she started as a community college student and so moved all the way through it. Finally ended up being very successful president for 8 years. She always said, I never thought I'd ever do this, but here I am. So anyway, so we use her as a great role model. And so but there are all kinds of stories like that where we've been able to work with then professionals, who are many of them were professionals at that point in time, but I also love working with beginning master's students back in the day. I don't do that obviously didn't do that as much as we moved on, but we have a separate higher ed master's program in student affairs. So anyway, but that's always been my great joy, and I continue to remain in contact with lots of folks like you and others around the country who are doing good things. Now, surprising, many of them I'm going to some of their retirement parties. That's how can this be? How can this be? So,
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I'm not planning on yours, by the way.
No. It's gonna be a while, Larry. It's
That's
gonna
right. Good. We need you.
Yes. One of the things, that has always amazed me about you is that of the number of presidents that you've, helped sort of forge through the pipeline. And so it's always, and you're still at it today. I kind of feel like you haven't really retired from that, because I know I hear things on the streets here in higher ed about, oh yeah, if you want to be president, call Larry Ebbers and he can help you out. So
And interestingly enough, I've never been one. So that's
yeah. And why is that, Larry?
I've had several opportunities during the search process of say, we're happy, Larry, we'll close this search process right now if you'll do this. And I said, no, that's not where my gifts are. I think it's in working with students and working with leadership development. That's always the kind of thing that I valued in my life. And not that I couldn't be one. I've had that also experience at private colleges where I was on the board. I did the search. They said, we'll stop it right now if you want to. And I said, no, that's not me. So it's the kind of life that I've enjoyed. And I should say my partner, Barb, as you well know, has been very supportive of all of this. And we've had lots of meetings at this house with regard to grad students, with regard to community college presidents, trying to solve issues and groups. And so it's just been a very good life for me. And I really enjoy this kind of thing. And I don't have to be in the leadership role. I've always done a number of presentations on leadership from the middle, and lots of ways to do that. So anyway.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, no, I we all enjoy Barb, so we appreciate you sharing Barb with us as well. And
it's all of you guys as well. So
such a lovely relationship that we've had with her. So in looking at some of the things that you've written about community college leaders in the past, so what are the most important qualities or competencies of community college leaders? What do they need to understand and know to be successful?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that I would point people to. American Association of Community Colleges has a competency list. They're in the 3rd edition. I'm proud to say that I was part of the first group that was called in to talk about competencies for leadership in community colleges. So it's really an exciting time in that sense of watching that. And so I would say that you really need to look at those. They're good. They have them for faculty. They have them for mid-level administrators. They have deans, aspiring CEOs. So it's I would really encourage you to take a look at those competencies. But I think a number of them are pretty substantial. And you look at kinds of things that they look at authenticity. There are two sides of it. There's the professional side and the personal side. And I would say, we're in an era that's very important in terms of authenticity, transparency, ethical leadership. People who have courage, people who can do conflict management, and as boards, and I realize that we're into an interesting appointment series of things here with regard to presidents. Some systems office appoint the presidents. Other places where they have local boards, they appoint the president. So it sort of depends on where you're looking and how you're doing it. But I think but still the number one, as AACC, American Association of Community Colleges, says about the future of the presidency, it is student success is the North Star for anybody who wants to be a community college president. And I think that's true.
Yeah.
Because in almost every presidential search we've done, it's about students. And so I think that continues to be the North Star. Now, there is a sort of a changing dynamic here that I see coming forth, is that all of a sudden workforce development is becoming a real issue. And obviously we need to pay attention to the news, the labor shortages all over, how we're going to solve this crisis. And the other one is resources, the ability to again, in many states, they've reduced resources, but there have been ways for people to offer scholarships and money and to do that. And so I would say that people are looking more for someone who could fundraise. They used to call it friend raising. Now they've just become bold enough to call it fundraising. So it's a matter of looking for ways that you can partner with the business community, ways in which you can find donors who are willing to support student scholarships. And so I think that's, I would say those are some of the things that they're looking for. But above all, personal values as you lead the system, and that those kinds of things that make things work well.
Yeah.
And I always tell my president candidates when I do this, when they're selected, job one is the board, job two is the board, job three is the board. So regardless of where, and this is I'm doing some work in Minnesota now, where they're onto an equity 2030 project. And so I think that, and they're very interested in looking for people who can enhance that project. But that's out of the system office. So again, but in a statewide group like this in Iowa, it's very different because it's all local boards. So you need to sort of gauge where you are and what kind of system you want to work in.
Yeah. No, that's really important to understand as well. And so one of the things that you brought up just now was the word courage, and wondering if you can say a little bit more about, have you seen examples where courage maybe bit somebody in the behind, or?
Sure. Well, we all have examples of that. And it's courage. I think courage is important. I view myself as an entrepreneurial change agent in that many respects, and that we've done a number of things here that community college leadership program being one of them. We did a lot of work on learning communities to bring them to Iowa State, and so I think it's courage with values. I mean, if people think that you're fair, understanding, and you look for the people who are willing to work with you. Obviously, we always say that most of the people in the middle will know if they understand, and obviously you have the detractors. But if you really think that there's value in these things, and you can present the value. But I think it's important to understand the value of teams, and that you need to have some people with you who can think, but not all think alike. In that sense, you can't have everybody just like you on a leadership team. And so it's an exciting time, and I do love to work. And be a change agent, but it does take courage. Sometimes you're gonna have, sometimes it'll be a little tougher than others, but overall, you keep, as I say, you keep your eye on the prize, and that prize is student success, and that's why we're here. So
Nice. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And just kind of shifting gears a little bit about kind of focusing a little bit about the pandemic.
mhm.
Um, in your opinion, sort of how do you feel the pandemic has impacted leaders in community colleges? What have you seen as sort of maybe some challenges, but also what are some surprising assets that perhaps came out of the community colleges?
It was a tough year for all my president
Yeah.
friends and the people who were part of the teams. And that, we received constant communication from our president, Wendy Wenderstein, about what we're doing here at Iowa State.
Mhm.
A lot of community colleges presidents were communicating on a regular basis, and things were changing. I mean, they were changing so much. And in cases, I think, where people really did well was the fact that they had a strong team working with them and realizing they could make the best judgment they could based on the data that they had. But I think that, there's certainly some outgrowths of this, the amount of work that we can do, like we're doing here with Zoom. I mean, I conducted 3 or 4 searches almost totally by Zoom. And people were concerned about that. And I said, I said, I've talked to one of my former employee of mine who is now a president of a large consulting firm. And he said, we're doing almost all of it by Zoom, given the conditions that exist. I think it was unfortunate we had to shift to online education so quickly. Not all faculty were ready to do that. And so it caused some changes in that. I think some faculty, of course, obviously, and I'm one of those. I would say I've taught online, but my preference is face to face, as you well know, and that the interactions that can occur. So I think we've learned to be much more efficient, much more in terms of all of this, but it's also at the same time a challenge for us and all leaders in order to do this. And with probably no changes forever, just like the Vietnam War protests. I mean, we had the protests with the Vietnam War that changed all of us in that respect, and so we deal with what we have. I was talking with the president yesterday and said she's retired. He says the toughest year of her life was last year, making decisions about student lives, and realized it was a disruptive kind of thing. And so the fact that it became political as opposed to medical in that respect, and so they dealt with us best they could. Others, I've just said, well, we've used it as a learning process, and now we will not return to business as usual kind of thing. So I think there are some things about it that will forever change academia, but that's the way we've always been. Life events and things that happen change, and one of the things I like about higher education is that it has great flexibility overall. I mean, realizing that it needs to change and adapt and move, and that is the exciting part about it. So
I appreciate that. So what advice do you give your presidents when they're facing challenges or hard times like this?
well, we talk about the options, but I said, the most important thing is your team, and that and I realize that you're going to be the point person for it all, and you have to develop a little thicker skin in some cases. But never lose sight of your goals and your values and what you do, and realizing that you're not going to make the right decision every time, and you do the best you can. And I've had my discussions with them is just to hear them out, let them talk, and get your opinion. And I think one of the values about all of the working together is that we have connections, and that's very important to keep those connections, friendships, outside that's one of the things I encourage about professional development and associations and relationships. One of the things that we know that the Lincoln Click cohorts, as well as the doctoral cohort has done, is that these people come to know each other, and they're calling each other all the time for advice and comment. So it's a matter of those relationships that you build early, and people that you trust to talk to. And so that's occasionally where I'll get some calls about how would you handle this, or I've got a problem, what do you need to do? And so you need to have we always used to call them personal advisory committee, sort of outline who your go-to people are, and they're not going to be just one person. We can be more than one person. So it's my advice to them to talk to your other colleagues, talk to other presidents, talk to your own team, obviously, and also obviously to stay current as possible. That's the kind of thing that with the pandemic, none of us knew exactly where all of this was going, and even the scientists were, dealing with all of that. So it's don't isolate yourself is what I would say to them, but also talk to people you can trust, because sometimes, well, one of the things I found out is some people are sort of, what shall I say, can't keep a secret or do that. So you need to be careful if you're about your advisors and who you're talking to. So that's one of the things I found out over time. If you want somebody to know something, you know who to tell, and you'll find the words. That happens.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's mostly advice.
Yes, we call those chismosos. Yeah, that's what we call them.
Well,
But that resonates with me, because I know, like, I would not be here without community. You need that community to help you kind of think through and be thought partners alongside with you. And
That's right. So important.
Yeah.
Because we know that there'll be other crises come along. So
yeah, no, I think it's an everlasting thing, and it's good to have some people in our corner to sort of support us through those hard times. So, so one of the questions, so I reached out to some of your fans out there in higher education, and so our friend from University of Cincinnati, one of the Associate Vice President of Student Affairs, Juan Guardia.
Yes.
Who was part of my cohort, and of course you were able to recruit a Cuban from Miami to Iowa, so I feel like that's a lot of accolades.
When I first met him, I said, "You need to think about it, Larry. I will never ever consider Iowa State. Never ever. I don't care what you do." So I just continue sending him packets of information, talking to him all the time, and so he ended up coming here. So
yes,
we had him stay at our home when he was here for recruitment purposes, all that sort of stuff. So
yes, and thank goodness he did. Yeah, he was a big support continues to be a big support for me. But he had a question. He says, of interest, I would love to hear from Larry of all the students he's recruited and assisted in completing their degrees. Are there any students that stood out that have persevered?
Well, I think there are lots of students that have, you being one of them, you obviously had some life changes occur as you were working through your doctorate, and that's, you were able to come back and complete. I would say certainly Juan was, but he is my best recruiting individual that I would say I've recruited, and we've had lots of people go on and do great things. But it's also about the team we had here at the time. We had people like Laura Rendon, John Shue, Nancy Evans, of course, Dan Robbins, myself, and Frankie Santos Leonan, who was our community. I brought him in for research. We didn't have a strong research component, and so in terms of the community college, and he brought that to us. So it's the kind of thing that I would say that, wow, thinking about all of them, it's just been a great experience. And so it's, but Juan will always be one of my favorite stories. You're also one of my favorite stories. But also at the same time, I think I really was concerned about, again, because of Lincoln Click, and that we really work with underrepresented groups. And I'm most proud of the fact that you were able to persevere in situations which were difficult at times, I'm sure, from a support group perspective. But we have a number of the president now of Old Dominion as one of our students, although he did a minor in higher ed, but he's always been a great supporter of the program. And so it's, but I'm also proud of the fact that we have many people in leadership roles in the state of Iowa. Most of the administrative teams are well balanced in terms of men, women now. In fact, more women than men. But looking at the administrative teams now, over half of them have either been in our leadership program with a degree or one of the programs. So all those people I would hold up as some of the kinds of people I worked with, not naming specific people, but other than you two at this point. So.
No, thanks for that. I appreciate that. And I heard that, I don't know if this number is correct, but you have hooded like around 170 students or something like that. 200.
200. Yeah, 200 as the chair or the co-chair. Now that happened because we had some people leave, and I took over students. I mean, it was obviously my role. One of my roles that I enjoyed was finishing people. And people who, I always told them, if you leave, the chances of you finishing the doctorate are 50-50. And some said, oh, no, I'll be able to do it. Well, you're going to a new job. You're expected to do all kinds of things, and you're not going to be able to finish. So anyway, that's the portion of what I know. Statistically, we're the same as everybody else. But on the other hand, I was always disappointed when someone left and did not finish. So,
yeah.
But I really enjoyed doing that. I was also the chief marshal for our graduation ceremonies. And so that was always a fun event. And a couple of people would say, how many did you do today? So it's kind of thing that, but again, it was part of the team. I mean, while I was chair of the committee, there were also a lot of other people who were on the dissertation committees and the master's committees that really helped. So.
Wow, 200, Larry. Wow, that's amazing. I'm looking at my own advising load, which I fear is a little bit mirroring Larry Ebbers, because I have about 24 students right now that I'm advising.
Well, they were always, the graduate dean was always on me. How can you do this many students? And I said, well, part of it is it's integrated work with my other work. And so it's, we were working on ways in which they could do it. And that we started a special cohort program for community college PhD program. A little bit of guts. In fact, Tim Davies was coming into Iowa and offering the program, for community college leaders, and we did have a couple people compete. A couple of presidents came to me and said, "Larry, why are they doing that and you guys are not?" So that's how we got started doing it. So
that's amazing. The other part of one's question was, were there any challenges during your time as an administrator that in hindsight you would have made a different decision?
I don't know if I made a different decision, but it was, you always think about, along the way, you certainly would have said, well, I may have done that a little bit differently. We had a real challenge in that leadership in the college was not being very successful. We had 32 vacancies, and I said, we've got to do something about this. Well, the administrator decided to ultimately give up her deanship. And so we were involved in recreating the college. The president came over and said, if you don't change this, you're not going to be a college. We were doing no grants, very few publications. We were just not a scholarly group in any sense. He said, you need to turn it around. So we had an interim dean, and Camilla Benbow, and I went in as associate dean on an interim basis, and there was another guy by the name of Dan Rashley. And so we served as there were no department chairs, everybody was interim, and there was no leadership. And so we said, there's a leadership vacuum here. And so we became the search committee to go out and recruit high qualified scholars in each of the areas within the college, which we did do. That's how we got John Shue. That's how we got Nancy Evans. Ultimately got Laura Rendon. And Frankie Leon. And so it was a matter of lots of challenges along the way about what we were doing, how we were doing it. And we also had involved in a sexual harassment case at that time that people were coming up to me at the gym and saying, you guys are wrong, you're out of bounds, you have no credibility, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was a challenging time, but we probably made a few mistakes along the way there. And but ultimately we had resolution of the sexual harassment case, as well as bringing in all the outstanding faculty that we had at that time. So
no, I think for sure I was a benefactor of all those outstanding faculty, for sure.
The other thing is, I was going back to, we had another president who I was on the search committee for it, came from Texas A&M, that gave us some money to recruit students of color. We did this through a lunch. Jim Sweeney and Jim Sweeney was on the ed part, I was on the higher ed part, and we had lunch with him, President. I'll think of it here in a little bit. Anyway, he said, so we got some money, and so we got back to the offices. The dean called me and said, Larry, so tell me what's going on. He said, I just got a call from the assistant to the president, said, you guys got a bunch of money to do minority. I said, that's right. He said, well, the assistant to the president wasn't real happy about it, but they made the commitment. So it's just going around the system. Yeah. And sometimes, you can get caught with doing that. But so that was one of the challenging times we did. And if you know and understand the system, you can go around it. Unfortunately, I had a very good relationship with Dean Lagamorcino, so he was not upset. In fact, he was happy. So he didn't tell the president that, but or whatever they call him, the executive vice president, I guess was his name. So,
Nice, nice.
so sometimes you have to do that to, knowing that we had the conversations always about, oh, really, did I know that? Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry. Well, we done it anyway. So sometimes you have to do that. So anyway, it's all part of leadership in a variety of ways.
Yes, yes. Going around the system sometimes is very helpful, but make sure that if you get caught and they're asking you for an apology, to apologize too.
Apologize, but you know what? The act was done, the deed was done, and
Right.
So.
Right. So one of my last questions for you is, what are your hopes and dreams for the next generation of higher education leaders? What is
Right.
that look like?
Yeah. I don't know if you've read, I saw the NASPA report. I don't know if you saw the new NASPA task report. It said that 67% would continue, but a third of them were considering leaving the field, and 25% said they never return to the field. I think that's that's the ebb and flow of life in that respect. We find a number of people who left their businesses, who are doing other kinds of things, and so as long as we have students, I have hope, and that they're willing to go for things. One of the issues in Iowa right now is the transgender, the law that just came in, and today students from Waukee High School were walking out in protest of the new law, and so it's as long as we have students and people who believe in these things, I think there's a great future. Now, I think most of us got into the profession because of someone who said, well, oftentimes I say, well, I didn't know there was this kind of a profession, higher education. And they said, I'd like to do that. Or we have said to people, have you thought about that? And so it's the kind of thing that we really, so I think with I go back to Art Levine, who was and still writing. We had a number of interactions with him, brought him to campus a couple of times. He said that, we're in the we and I cycles. If we go through about every 40 years. And I haven't read I haven't really talked to him lately, but he is saying, he had every 4-year cycles, and we've been in a real I cycle. But I think that the new generation, I see this in our granddaughters and grandsons. It's a new generation, and they're moving more to we than they are I. And I realize that the Gen Zs are millennials are pretty much focused on themselves. But I think there's some real movement as we see all of these issues running around. So we're moving to a different cycle. And I hope that we are, and I think we are. In terms of we need to return to civility, we need to return to community, and that we've been in pretty divisive politics for the last few years, and somehow we need to get through that. But have trust that we will, and that I think there's a real future in higher education. If my grandson, who's coming to Iowa State this fall, by the way,
Nice.
From Indianapolis, which is I can go into the whole recruiting effort. That I tried to stay out of it, but it worked. So anyway, it's he said, I'm thinking, he said, I want to get my own lab. He's going to be an ag and biosystems engineer. He said, I'm going to get my own lab and I want to be a professor. And he said, work with students. He said, that to me would be exciting. So it's, so we always sort of say, wow, what are we doing here? We look like we're on a down cycle. There's always hope. And I just think that, we've got to figure out a way to restore the academy in some respects. And yet we know that there'll always be controversial things coming out of the academy, but that's why we're here. That's what we do. And so it's a matter of finding those leaders who have that authenticity, the courage, the values that keep us centered. So
yeah, I appreciate
I'm optimistic about the future. I'm concerned about funding, but we've always, for 55 years in higher education, we've always been concerned about funding and figuring out ways in which we can do it. We just completed many campuses are to $1 billion campaign here at Iowa State, and the majority of us for student scholarships. So that's that's a good thing. So
for sure.
So
Awesome.
I have hope that I'm not pessimistic, but on the other hand, you still keep involved, and but you guys are the future, and so I do believe in legacies, and that we'd all learn from others. I can point to mine, and I'm sure all of us who've been involved in this business say, It is, and I'm more convinced it's about legacy than anything else. If you look around the leaders there, the people who've been taught by other leaders, and that's the beauty of higher ed, in the sense that whether it be in the classroom, I still think about some of the faculty that I had, but I also think about the administrators that I had, and so it's fun. It's fun. It's really fun. So.
No, that's amazing. That gives us a lot of hope to think about too. And I just want to thank you, because I know 50 years is an amazing career, and to still continue to be standing here and also just sort of having that hope and having that joy for our field. I think sometimes we get caught up sometimes in the negative, I mean,
Right,
we're trying to like put out all these fires, and many things are coming at us at once, within the field of higher education, and people are feeling burned out after all these years. And I think this conversation hopefully has been really restorative for me and also our audience, and also grateful that I get to stand on your shoulders, and what a legacy that you've left for all of your students, and for many of us that you've helped kind of build and lift up in many years. And so thank you for continue to uplift many of us that are still in the field, and for always being a sounding board when we need to call you in an emergency about what to do. So I'm grateful for you and your time, and for sharing all that you have learned throughout your 50-year career with our listeners here. So thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I've just, I love watching all of you guys and the contributions that you're making, and the friendships that you're developing in the communities, and that's the real important part about what we do and going ahead into the future. So thank you, Susana. Best of luck to you as you continue. And obviously, you're one of our bright stars, and I appreciate that the kind of work that you're doing. I remember when you came and talked about a dissertation topic, and you said, "I don't know." I said, "Go for it. Go for it." So
it's made. It's really, it's been a rewarding career because of that choice. Yeah. But thank you again for being here, and for your time, your generosity, for sharing today. Listeners, you can receive reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to Student Affairs Now newsletter, or browsing our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. Today, thank you to our sponsors today, Leadership. Leadership partners with universities and colleges to create transformational leadership experiences, both virtually and in person, for students and professionals, with a focus on creating a more just, caring, and thriving world. Leadership offers engaging learning experiences on courageous dialogue, integrity, equity, resilience, and community building. To find more, please visit leadership.org, virtual programs, or connecting with them on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Stylus is also a proud sponsor of Student Affairs Now today. Browse through their student affairs, diversity, and professional development titles at styluspub.com, and use the promo code SANOW for 30% off all books and plus free shipping. You can also find them on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So huge shout out to Natalie Ambrosi, the production assistant for the podcast, who does all the behind the scenes work to make us look good and sound good. So if you're listening today and not already receiving our weekly newsletter, please visit our website at studentaffairsnow.com. Scroll down to the bottom of the homepage to add your email to our MailChimp list. So while you are there, check out all of our archives. I'm Susana Muñoz. Thanks again to Dr. Larry Ebbers today, and everyone who is listening and watching. Make it a great week.